Joining me now on set is Caitlin Huey-Burns. She's a CBSN political contributor and national political reporter for RealClearPolitics. All right, so Caitlin, President Trump is now calling for a boycott of the NFL. He rescinded NBA star Steph Curry's invitation to the ceremonial visit to the White House. When you look at the political landscape right now, why is it you think perhaps that the president might be choosing to engage on this particular issue?
Right. Well, to put this in a little bit of context, we saw over the course of the campaign, then candidate Trump often liked to kind of pick these fights and kind of intensifying some racial divides and kind of pitting people against each other in order to speak to a certain portion of the electorate that really felt that he was speaking to their voice. And so this is going to be a popular move among his base of support, which kind of sees the lack of, they see this as a lack of respect for the country. And I don't think that Trump is going to stop discussing this issue, particularly since you have NFL players over in London taking the knee earlier today. I think he's going to keep going after this as a sign of, look, they're disrespecting the flag abroad. The problem, though, here, of course, is that it speaks to the way in which free speech, of course, is also considered an act of patriotism. So this is a moment, to put it in broader context, that the president is up against a lot of adversity here in terms of his agenda, right? The health care bill looks poised to fail again. He is supportive of this incumbent in Alabama who is behind in the polls. That would be a blow to the president. And of course, he's facing a lot of really tough issues on the national stage as well as the foreign policy stage with North Korea. So up against a wall here, and we've seen him try to gin up support among his base in times like this.
So just to follow up on that point, I did a quick scan of tweets by the president. Out of 10 tweets sent by the president in roughly a 24-hour period this weekend, 6 were aimed at sports figures. 2 out of the 10 mentioned North Korea. What kind of message does that send about President Trump's priorities?
Well, it shows that I think a lot of people would criticize this as, not paying close attention to the things he should be focused on. Interestingly, that interview with Mnuchin was probably originally geared towards talking about tax reform, which House and Senate Republicans are eager to talk about now that health care seems to be fading away. We still have to see what happens with that bill. So this is just another example of a distraction it poses for lawmakers in Congress. Now they're all going to return to Washington next week and have to kind of answer for these things. But it's also important because, Trump has weighed in on these kinds of things before and has caused lots of controversy. This one, though, I think is intensified because you have people like Bob Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, with whom Trump is very close, that they talk often, they've been together often. Bob Kraft's statement today really condemning these comments was pretty striking and I think significant, and we're going to see this kind of continue throughout the week.
Yeah, I thought Bob Kraft's statement was one of the most striking out of all the statements that we've heard so far. But let's talk about health care. Senator Susan Collins says that she thinks it's going to be very difficult for her to vote for the Obamacare repeal in its current form. We now have Senator Ted Cruz saying that he's not going to support it as well. What does that mean? Is this even going to make it to the floor for a vote? Well,
I can't imagine that Mitch McConnell will want to put this to another vote, just given what we saw with the last time this happened. I think the reason that lawmakers were proceeding with this in the first place was because they were up against a clock. As you know, that window for reconciliation, which is that arcane process that allows them to pass legislation like this with only majority support with Republicans, that closes at the end of the month. So they have limited time to do something on this. So lots of these members felt kind of compelled to give this one last shot. But this is a very unpopular piece of legislation, not only among the general public, but also among Republican governors. You've seen lots of Republican governors weighing in, putting pressure on their own senators to not support this bill. I think McCain's comments earlier this week saying that he wouldn't support it, I think that gave some political cover for some others who were considering it.
So despite the opposition, though, the White House made very clear it was behind the Graham-Cassidy bill. So could there be a point in the future here where perhaps we might actually see the White House coming up with its own version of a health care repeal law?
Well, they have, for this kind of legislation, they have ceded the leadership to Congress to craft the policy here. But the president has shown that he's very frustrated with the way things have been going on. He has talked about the way in which Republicans have campaigned for several years on repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act, and they have not been able to do so. So he has been very, he's been going after Rand Paul, he's been going after others, trying to put that pressure, but he hasn't yet been able to figure out what kind of motivates Republicans in the Senate, at least, to come around to something that's plausible. I'd also note that bipartisan fixes to Obamacare, those discussions and those proposals failed this week also. And so there is going to be a lot of focus after this window closes on reconciliation on what to do to preserve the health care law. I think you're going to see a lot of Democrats talking about that this week. Interestingly enough, of course, Democrats are also pushing for a single-payer health plan eventually, Medicare for all. Bernie Sanders pushing that. So you have this interesting dynamic of Democrats thinking about their own future, also weighing kind of the political realities at hand.
I want to turn to another issue, the president's controversial travel ban. It expires Sunday, but we know that the president is set to introduce new quote-unquote restrictions. What is it that we know about that?
Well, the president has been very critical of the courts striking down this ban. He also, to again put this in context, does not have a lot of accomplishments to speak of at this point in terms of his agenda. And so I think, pushing forward again on something like this, I think comes at a time that he's trying to, again, gin up his base with support around this kind of issue and also to secure some kind of victory here. But we know that several iterations of this have been challenged by the courts, and I wouldn't be surprised if the president, continues to kind of make this political play.
We know the Supreme Court's going to hear about this issue in just a few weeks. How important is that going to be for the Trump administration?
Well, I think it's going to be very significant, and also the president's reaction to it will be very significant, I think, to watch as well. And I'm also kind of keeping an eye on Republicans in Congress when they're faced with this kind of issue, because over and over again, in terms of the travel ban and other issues that kind of challenge some conservatives who have talked who have focused their conservatism around the Constitution, have been kind of put in this difficult position. So kind of waiting to see what these voices say.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much for joining us. Always great to see you.
You too. Thanks.